All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just ask that everyone stay on mute and save questions for the end of the presentation. We are recording this so that it can be viewed later and it will be posted on our YouTube. You can also feel free to put questions in the chat. But my name is Alyssa Fielder. I am the board chair for Reuseful. And before we jump into today's topic, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about Reuseful. We are a circular economy nonprofit in the Kansas City metropolitan area. We focus on diverting waste from the landfill through things like Undumpster Day, or we also host free repair cafes in the metropolitan area so folks can get their common household items fixed for free. And then we also host these Wednesday one-on-one webinars where we focus on different sustainability topics. So this is our website here. You can check out our calendar. And that will show you all of our upcoming events. You can subscribe to our newsletter. And then you can also look at some of the other stuff that we do. We also have hundreds of charity partners to connect you with if you are local to the area. So if you have things you're trying to get rid of and don't want to throw them out, there's different folks that can take your goods for you. So with that, I'm going to go and get started and pull up my presentation. Everyone can see that okay? All right. Okay, so today we're going to talk about backyard chickens, just the basics. This is something that I'm super passionate about. I love chickens. They're really fun and they're also a really great source of food. So just to get started, why have chickens? Especially if you live in the United States, eggs can be expensive. We were seeing a lot of things rise in cost, especially food, and it's nice to be able to have something that's right in your backyard that's a good source of protein. It's also a way for you to control your food source. So what are the chickens being fed? That's something you can control. You know how they're being treated. And they're also just a ton of fun, whether they're chicks or full grown. Chickens are honestly pretty hilarious birds to watch, and they just add a lot of comic relief to your day. And this is a picture of a couple of my chickens, and as you can see too, eggs come in all sorts of different colors, so that's a fun part of it too. All right, so where to start if you're thinking about getting backyard chickens? It's important to think about where you live. A lot of times, you have to own a home in order to have something like this. That's not always the case. It really depends on your landlord, but definitely something to consider. I think another thing that's really important too is what your living situation is like. If you have pets, are your pets going to be friendly with chickens? Is that something that can coexist? Do you have family around that can help if needed? And also, do you have the space for them? So whether you're choosing to free range them or if you want to, if you're just keeping them in a coop, you do have to have space for that. The other thing that's important is whether your zoning code or your local ordinances actually allow you to have chickens. Because you don't want to get into a situation where you buy chickens and you buy the coop and you buy all the supplies and then you come and find out that it's not allowed and maybe you get some kind of notice of violation or you get in trouble. In some cases, do you need a permit to have chickens? So I'll go into a little bit of detail about my particular county that I live in the zoning code. rules that I have to follow, but typically I've seen across, especially the US, that a lot of places, more so rural, or in my case, I do live in a city, which is kind of strange, but they allow you to have at least 6 permits, no more, without 6 chickens without having a permit. So that's a very common number. It also happens to be the same number that you'll see if you go to buy chickens. Sometimes they will only let you purchase 6 at a minimum. Um, in a lot of cases, roosters are not allowed. So even if you live in a place where um, you are allowed to have 6 chickens, or however many, most times roosters are not allowed, specifically because of the noise issues. It's against noise ordinances. If you live in a rural area, most places that are zoned for agriculture, that is different though, and you would be allowed to have a rooster. So to give you a specific example, forward here. Okay, so this is where I live. So I live in Wyandotte County in Kansas, and this is a screenshot of our zoning code. So zoning codes can be incredibly difficult to navigate. But this one has a search bar, so I always just search by the topic that you're trying to find. So I search for chickens, and it actually associates both chickens and fowl as the same word. And this kind of goes over what um, what I have to follow here. I will say in some cases, um, there are state laws that regulate things like chickens, but in most cases, your local municipality will have its own rules. Those can be stricter than the state, and those are the ones that you want to follow. If you live in an area that's more of an unincorporated place, sometimes they actually defer to the state because they don't have anything locally for you to follow. So really, make sure you check the multiple levels of government to make sure that you're following the right one. But here it kind of talks about what I'd already mentioned, but um, it states kind of, it defines, what fowl are, um, what hens are, and then it also will tell me now exactly how many you can have, and where you can keep them. So in this instance, if you look here, it tells you exactly that you can have only up to 6, regardless of how big your property is. And if you have any more, you have to get a permit for it. It also talks about how you keep and maintain your chickens or your chicken area. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And one other thing I want to point out too that's important, and this is why thinking about your space or your yard is helpful, is that here it also defines where exactly you can put your coop. So in this case, it cannot be closer than 25 feet to the nearest portion of any building occupied by a human being. So any dwelling in particular, it has to be at least 25 feet from. So that includes your neighbors too. So I would always start there, and then moving forward. Again, it talks a little bit more about enclosure. In this case, it's talking about, you're technically required to keep it sanitary because chickens can attract mice. Mice love chicken feed. And if you are not keeping, your food in containers, or you're not cleaning your chicken coop, you will get mice, and that can become a problem, not just for you, but also for your neighbors. I haven't actually seen that people getting in trouble necessarily for this. It's not like people are going around inspecting things, but if it were to become a problem, technically for me, I would be in violation of this. And then the last thing I'll point out in this too is that in my code, it actually tells me how many laying beds or nesting beds I have to have per chicken. So this is saying that I have to have at least 1 box per chicken. And it also has square footage. So that's something to keep in mind too. Okay. So you've done all of your research, what you're allowed to have, how many chickens you can have. which might help you decide whether or not, do you want to stick with 6 because it's easy? Do you want to go for more and go through a permitting process? That might be costly, that might be time consuming, but now you have all of the guidelines that you need to move forward. So, what's next? I think once you commit to saying, yes, I want to go for this, I know how many chickens I want to have, I know it's allowed, then you have to figure out what kind of chickens are you going to get, and then, where are you going to keep them, and what other supplies do you need? So, I'm just going to go over this briefly. There are tons of different types of chickens that you can get at varying ages, from, fertilized eggs to chicks to pullets, which are young chickens, to adults. And so when you're kind of starting this journey, I think it's important to think about why you want chickens. Do you want to have chickens that produce a lot of eggs, and that you can, always rely on having a lot of eggs around? Do you want chickens that are friendlier? Maybe you have little kids and you want them to be able to interact with the children. Or, in some cases, like in mine, I was really interested in having chickens that had different color eggs. So like one particular breed that's really fun is Easter eggers, and they're called that because they lay basically Easter egg colors. They lay all sorts of different kinds of colors, from purples to pinks to greens, to blues. You can also consider weather. Like if you live in a really hot climate versus maybe a really cold climate, there are chickens that do better in different climates. And then these are a couple more. So this is a chicken I had that recently, I will tell you, I did lose a couple. And then this, I mostly have olive acres, which are a mixed breed, but they do produce green eggs. And I'll provide some resources, but I mean, you can Google search. There's tons of chickens available. There's different ways to get them for sure. So it's a fun little deep dive you can do. But again, when you're looking at what types of chickens to get, these are important things to consider for sure. Another one too is that sometimes when you go for the fancier breeds, or the breeds that they produce pretty eggs, or they're fancier looking chickens, or they're rarer breeds, they can be expensive. Whereas some of the more common chickens might be cheap. The cost varies based on what age they are. So the older they get, sometimes the more expensive they get, because someone's put an investment into them and fed them and that kind of thing. But also, one thing to think about, especially from a sustainability perspective, is where are you going to get them from? Are there chickens locally, and that's where you're going to go for, where you don't have to order them or travel very far? And that's a consideration that I made too. So, this is a video. I don't think it's going to work, but these were the chicks that I first got when I started with my chickens. And so these were almost pullet ages, and those are hens that are like 8 weeks old and up, so under a year. And chicks can be a little bit more work because they're fragile, and they really can't fend for themselves. Chickens are not good at fending for themselves, especially if you don't have a rooster. So that is something to consider. They're a lot more vulnerable to predators. If you're thinking about getting eggs, that's a whole nother story. Because, if you don't have chickens already, that means you have to have certain equipment for those fertilized eggs. And then you can, of course, already buy adults. One thing to keep in mind for that too is chickens tend to live like 6 to 10 years. Some breeds only last a couple of years, especially the ones that are really high producing egg producers. So just things to consider. Okay, so when to buy your chickens? Typically you're probably seeing a lot of stuff happen now. We see a lot of chicks happening around early spring, Easter period. Um, Adults you can kind of get year round depending. And if you order from the bigger companies, they always have things available, but usually you start to see the chicks um, becoming available in like late winter, so February, March kind of time. Something to consider though with that is if you do live in a place that's really cold or really hot during those periods of the year, you might not want to go with chicks because they'll also have to deal with that weather. And if you can't keep them inside, that can be problematic. So for me, and these were the very first chickens I got, and still have most of these. I went on Facebook and I joined a bunch of local chicken groups. Like there's like a Kansas backyard chickens group, that kind of thing. And I just searched around, looked posts. A lot of people will just post what's available. And I found someone who was local who had these olive acres. And so that was important for me because I didn't really want to necessarily support these big commercial chicken farms that you'll see out there. And this particular chicken, so when you order chicks, what's important to know is not all of them can be 100% confirmed to be females. So when I got these chickens when they were about 8 weeks old, I was told, hey, I'm 95% sure these are all hens, but not 100%. And what ended up happening was that this chicken right here, who I named Avril, was actually not a lady. She ended up being a rooster, which my neighbors did not appreciate. So luckily the chicken breeder that I had gone to, she said that I could take him back and exchange him for one of her older hens. So that's what I ended up doing. But it can be a little tricky if you accidentally get a rooster and you don't mean to because they are noisy and not as many people want them. At some point later on, I got a couple more chickens and two of them ended up being roosters. And I was able to find someone who lived on a farm in a rural area who would take them, but just things to consider. Okay, so once you figured out what kind of chickens you want and what age you want, the next thing is to figure out where you're going to keep them. There's tons and tons of chicken coops that you can buy. This is definitely going to be the most expensive thing in terms of getting ready for chickens. Coops can be very expensive. I'm talking anywhere from, $250 to a couple $1,000. And these here are pretty common ones that you'll find on, your local feed store. This is particularly a brand by a company. They call them egg-Loos. These are more expensive, but they're really easy to clean. They are ventilated, so they're good in the summer. But one of the things that I will say that I fell into is I built a coop initially that I'll show you in a little bit. And then I ended up ordering a coop from Tractor Supply. These are a lot smaller when you actually get them in person. So if you're not going to free range your chickens and you're just going to keep them in the coop for whatever reason, just be careful because this might be, a 2x2 space here. So something to think about there too. Things that I've learned is when you're either going to build or buy your coop, definitely consider ventilation. If it's here in Kansas, it gets really cold in the winter, but it also gets really, really hot in the summer. So that's you need to have something that's one, able to be cool in the summer and that has a breezeway, but you need something that's also going to provide insulation and heat in the winter. And again, make sure that your zoning code doesn't say that you have to have a certain size, because it might potentially, another thing, that could be good for you if you do keep them in a coop. I have a coworker who does this, is he has wheels on his coop, so he actually moves the chickens around the yard. Um, if you keep chickens in one spot, and they don't move at all in your yard, they will remove all the grass eventually, because what they do is they dig, and they will dig holes. So having wheels is nice, so you can move them and kind of prevent that from happening. And also allows them to have access to grass. Another thing too is just the kind of materials in the coop too. Some of these coops that you'll find, like even the one that I ended up buying, the materials are not that durable. The roof is already, I've had mine for I think a year, and the roof is already starting to fall apart, and I'm gonna have to replace it. So that's something to consider. And if you happen to be handy, it might be more cost effective for you to build something. So these are 3 links, and I'll send out this PowerPoint too, but the Chicken Coop Company is really awesome. They have tons and tons of different types of coops with various sizes. The omelet egg glues I showed you, if you're really into something that's easy to clean, is nice. They also have the igloos have wheels too. And then lastly, if you're interested in building and are really a DIY person, free chicken coop plans are available. You can find them online and just follow a pre-designed plan. Okay. All right. So really step 3, you've got your chickens, you've got your coop. Now what other things do you need? So something that you have a lot of freedom is really in the feed. So this also depends on age. If you get chicks, there's chick specific feed. You're going to want to get that. Sometimes there's medicated versus unmedicated feed. Medicated feed will provide, typically it's like anti-parasitics. Maybe there's antibiotics in it to help chicks. You don't have to do that. There's pros and cons to using medicated feed. Once your hens become adults, there's layer feed, and it's important that you get layer feed and not meat maker feed, because you want to make sure that the ladies are going to get all the calcium that they need to produce their eggs and to have shells that are actually strong. I've seen online, and I've looked into it, where there are folks that will actually grow their own mealworms for their chickens. They do have a lot of protein in mealworms, but it's not a full, it doesn't cover like the full, all of the nutrients that chickens need. And that is like a whole other side project too. But people do it. My chickens aren't even really the biggest fan of mealworms. They prefer regular old earthworms. So for me, it just wasn't an option. And then the last thing really that you would need is grit, and grit is often like oyster shells. So chickens bodies don't necessarily digest things because they don't have teeth. So whatever they eat, it goes in how it goes in. There's nothing that's really going to break it down. So grit is kind of like stone-like, and when they ingest it, it helps to break down whatever it is they're eating. I don't give my chickens grit because I do free range them, and they eat a lot of other things like, I don't know, small rocks. Chickens are weird. They'll get into strange things, but they'll eat other things that kind of serve that same purpose. But if you're not going to free range your chickens, definitely recommend getting that. And then there's different treats. My favorite treats to give my chickens are leftovers. You do have to be careful though. There are certain things that can be toxic to chickens. You can look it up, but a lot of people will give their chickens whatever it is that they have leftovers for. But that isn't necessarily the best thing for them. My chickens love watermelon and cucumbers. Especially in the summer, I'll actually cut up watermelon and cucumber and put it in the freezer so it gets frozen. And then they have a frozen treat that they can eat when it's super hot, because we get like 100-degree Fahrenheit weather here. So the last thing I'll say about feed too is the types of food range from it's just like humans. You kind of get your junk food version of chicken feed. It's going to be your cheapest. And then you can get things like all natural feed, and then you can get organic feed. Organic feed is definitely very expensive. I use all natural feed because it's kind of a happy medium, where it's a little bit better quality, but it's not nearly as costly because the organic feed can be sometimes twice or even 3 times the cost. For with my chickens, I have with 6 chickens, I buy 1 bag of feed. I think it's 50 pounds. And that usually will last me a month to 6 weeks. But in the spring and the summer when they're out and there's grass and there's bugs, they actually eat very little feed. It's mostly during the winter, the cooler months when there's not insects or things available for them to eat that they rely on the feed. Okay. Um, Waterers, I have this one here. It's this is a metal one. I really, really love this one. I've had plastic waterers in the past. There's also folks you can find online like videos of people making their own waterers. I like this one because it's durable. Plastic breaks. Plastic is also for me a little bit harder to clean. But this one's really nice and it's really big too, as a 3 galloner, so you don't have to necessarily worry about filling it up all the time. The one thing I'll say about water is if you do have low temperatures at some point, you will likely need to get a water that has a heater attached. Because here, I mean, especially when we get into negative temperatures, like the water is going to freeze almost instantly in the winter. Um, and then I think the last couple things too, it's always good to have a couple medical related supplies around. Poultry spray, and chicken dust. There's different versions of these, and you can look online. Some of them have pesticides in them, specifically permethrin. So if you're not looking to do that and you want to go the all natural route, make sure you're looking out for that ingredient. But these are great because there's either dust or spray that you can spray on them to help with things like mites or parasites. Because no matter what, if your chickens are outside all the time, they're probably going to get mites at some point. And then lastly is bedding. Um, it depends on a couple of factors. I use a mix of straw and wood shavings. I typically like to use straw more in the winter because it's a little bit warmer, and then I use wood shavings in the warmer months. I've also seen people use sand because it's easier to clean, but again, you kind of want to consider like what are the temperatures that you're dealing with, the climate, and what maybe is the best bedding for that. Okay. And then the biggest issue that I have with chickens is really these 2 categories here. So where I live, our biggest predators really are dogs, hawks, uh, raccoons, possums, fox, coyotes. Um, if you live in other places that have like large snakes or like weasels, those would also be a concern. But for me, these are the predators that I have to deal with. I have lost 3 chickens to dogs in the neighborhood. I've lost one to a hawk, and I've lost one to a raccoon. Raccoons are interesting because they like to dismember chickens, but not necessarily eat them. So that's kind of like if that's what you end up finding the next morning, that's kind of why. For me, what happened with the raccoon is that my husband said he put the chickens away, but they were actually nesting in the garage. They had not gone into their coop, and that's why there was that incident with the raccoon. So definitely make sure your chickens are in your coop if you're letting them out. With a hawk, like if you have big trees and you have hawks in your area, like chickens are a pretty easy target for them and they will hang out and watch them. So a lot of times that's why people will end up containing their chickens. I will say I haven't had issues with fox or coyotes yet, but I do have them in the area. And then lastly, possums. I haven't specifically had issues with possums killing chickens, but I did have a possum for quite a while that would sneak into my coop and eat all of my eggs. So that's just something else to consider. From a medical standpoint, the only two things that I really deal with constantly are what's called bumblefoot, and that's this diagram here. So bumblefoot, basically, because chickens are always scratching at the ground and digging, they'll cut up the bottoms of their feet, and then those cuts get infected from, they'll step in their own poop or step in mud or whatever, and it gets infected. And so you'll see scratches, and then suddenly you'll start to see these scabs that develop, and they start to get worse and worse. And you'll also see the foot will become inflamed. So eventually, if it gets really bad, a chicken won't be able to walk, and sometimes they might even lose a foot or toes. So it's good to kind of just periodically check their feet, make sure they don't have anything starting. There are ways to treat this that I can share. They are a little bit, invasive. So if you're not comfortable with medical stuff, might be good to try to find a vet or someone who can help. And again, I mentioned mites before. They're hard to see. It's just chicken lice. But they like to hang out in chicken bedding. And that's why it's important to constantly clean your coop. But there's different treatments for that, but just something to keep in mind. Chickens naturally try to take care of mites by having dust baths. So when you see them digging and then covering themselves with dirt, that's okay. That's them naturally trying to deal with the mites. So that's also a good opportunity if you get some of that chicken dust, which helps with the mites and the parasites, is I will pour the chicken dust in whatever hole they're dust bathing in, and then they'll just naturally put it on themselves. The one other thing too is that I wanted to mention is heat. I have lost one chicken to a heat stroke. I had a very dark colored chicken that did pass in front of me during a 100-degree day. So it can be difficult if you live in a hotter climate to have chickens that are darker for that reason. So yeah, that is everything I have. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat, but if anyone has anything now, feel free to jump in. Okay, I see what's the square footage to chicken quantity that we should adhere to. It's a good question. I don't know if there's a good answer to that because different breeds have different sizes. For me, my coop right now is probably like the actual coop where they stay at night is about maybe 3 by 3 feet. And then their outdoor space that I keep them in at the moment, because I just had a hawk experience, so I'm trying not to let them out for a little bit, is probably like 10 by 6. So it's kind of a small space. But I will say I wouldn't be too worried about where they actually sleep at night, because they're gonna be all snuggled up together anyway. It's more so what space they have access to graze and roam around. So I would say the more the better if you can. And again, like your code might have a specific requirement too, so look at that. In terms of nesting boxes, I do want to add, in my code, it says that I'm supposed to have 1 nesting bed per 3 chickens. I have 3 nesting beds in the current coop that they're in, for 6 of them. But chickens are weird in that they will have 1 popular bed. So, they only lay in 1 for like a month, and then for whatever reason, they'll go into another one, and that's like the new popular nesting bed that they all lay in. I don't know why they do that. I don't know if all chickens do that, but that's typically what I've experienced, to the point where there will be 2 chickens in 1 nesting bed trying to lay at the same time, even though there's others that are available. So for whatever reason, that happens. And they could make a different choice and they choose not to. So I don't know. Okay, going to Mariah's question, what bedding absorbs odor the best? Personally, I would say the wood shavings do. Straw, when it gets, well, a couple things. Straw doesn't really absorb things well. And when it gets wet, it gets sticky, kind of no matter what it is, even if it's water. And it's quicker to mold. So I like it in the winter just because it's a little bit warmer, but I definitely prefer wood shavings for that reason. Okay, and then how long did you say the 50-pound bag of feed lasts me? So during like cold months when there's nothing for them to graze on, it probably lasts like 4 to 6 weeks. But in late spring, summer, I would say it probably lasts 2+ months. They really are not, they just don't need it. They don't need it. So it's nice. Okay, how to keep them protected from the cold in the winter, yeah. Um, I so a couple of different things. I worry less about the cold. Most chickens are pretty hardy, but I've struggled more so with heat than I have with cold. In the winter, what I do with my coop is I get a clear plastic tarp, like one of those builders ones that you see on the side of buildings. And what I do is I actually like cover the entire coop and I tuck it in so it just becomes this big greenhouse effect and it keeps them a lot warmer that way. Um, if you live in a really cold climate, they do have chicken heaters, which sometimes are just these like slates that chickens can sit on. And a lot of times you can find some that have timers that will turn on only if the temperature drops below a certain degree. For me, that doesn't work because I don't have any outlets close, but it could be an option. But I really do like the creating the greenhouse kind of thing. That seems to help my chickens. But you can always tell if a chicken's being affected by the cold if they get frostbite, because chickens that have bigger combs or wattles on their faces, um, these are gonna get frostbite more than those that don't really have those. And the frostbite will just look like the ends will start to blacken and sometimes they fall off. So those are good signs to check on. Um, I put wood shavings in both. I will say something about chickens is that even if I just put the shavings in the coop where they're nesting, it will end up outside of the coop. They kick everything around constantly. So they're going to move it around regardless. So I allow my chickens to leave in the winter if it's not too bad. But honestly, like if we get snow and I open my chicken coop door, they're not going out. And I don't know if that's all chickens, but mine are like, nope, we're good. We're not going to leave. So if it's, not a snowy day and it's not too bad, I'll give them the option. And sometimes they'll come out, but a lot of times they just choose to stay. Okay, with getting chicks from a farm supply place, how long before chicks' feathers grow out? So they can be taken outside instead of keeping them in under heat. Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the breed, but for my chicks, I moved them out, I think around 10 to 12 weeks. So it depends on when you get them. Once they start to shed their baby feathers and start to grow in their adult feathers, which some breeds will do super, super fast. If it's like spring and not too bad, I'll put them out. And what I did with mine too is, because chickens are messy and keeping them inside is a mess, like around 10 weeks, I put them outside and I did have a way to hook up a heating lamp too, just in case they needed it. But it's something that you just kind of have to play by ear based on the breed and how soon their feathers start to come in. And then also what your temperature is outside, but I would say you don't have to wait for them to be fully covered in their adult feathers. Okay. See, how do I know the difference between roosters and hens in the beginning? Yeah, so it's really hard to sex a lot of chickens. There are some breeds, if you're concerned about, that are sex linked, which means only certain colors will be female, and they know for sure that if this chick is this color, that it's a female. So you can, if you want to get chicks and you're not sure, that's a good route to go down, is you can just Google like sex-line chickens and it'll show you what kind of breeds exist for those. I waited a little longer to get the 8 weeks old ones because it's more likely to be able to guess accurately. But even then there was still an error. So once they start getting their feathers in, typically with hens, hens are very plain. Let me just go back here a couple. So you can see my hens here. They're still pretty, but the roosters are super colorful. You'll also see here in this photo, both these photos is, you know, and even before this too, roosters often have different colored tails, and their tails when they're younger will start to curve that way, whereas hens stick straight up. So you want to look for the coloration, the shape of the tail, the color of the tail, and then oftentimes, but not always, roosters will have bigger combs and wattles. With this particular chicken, with olive eggers, it's hard because a lot of them don't even have combs to begin with, but those are things that you can look for. Okay. I heard once a temp stays above 50 degrees overnight and they have all of their feathers. Yeah, I mean, that it could be. Like I said, play it by ear, and it's just kind of based on factors. I definitely put mine out before 50 degrees though, and they were fine. And like I said, you know, typically have more issues with heat than I do with cold. So, okay. Any other questions? Did I miss anything? Okay, well, I will, this recording will be on our YouTube page. Oh, cheapest supplies, okay. Honestly, if you're good at making things, that's definitely one way to do it. There's a lot of DIY stuff, but in terms of cheap supplies, I would look at, a lot of reuse stores as well. There's also certain things that are maybe bait for dogs that you can repurpose for chickens. But yeah, just in terms of costs, again, those coops are gonna be the biggest expense. So if you can find like a used coop or something that you can repurpose to be a coop, that's probably the best. Um, but yeah, I will post this on our YouTube. I'll send out the presentation to everyone that signed up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And thanks for coming.